Imagine the scene. It's January 1924. We're at Gorky, this grand snow-covered estate just outside of Moscow. The air inside is still, heavy with the scent of medicine and, well, with impending doom. A man has just died. But this isn't just any man. This is the individual who effectively set the entire 20th century on fire.
It's a moment of absolute freezing suspension in history. You have the political elite of the Soviet Union gathering there, hovering over the body, and almost immediately the atmosphere shifts from mourning to something stranger.
Right, because looking at the sources, the memoirs, the archives, the behavior of his closest allies, specifically Stalin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev, frankly sounds like science fiction.
Or a horror movie.
It really does.
It borders on the macabre. We aren't just talking about a state funeral here. We are talking about a scramble to scientifically dissect the source of his genius.
This detail just blew my mind. They bring in a German neuroscientist, a man named Oscar Volch. They don't just study the brain. They literally slice it into 30,000 segments.
30,000.
They are looking for the physical location of the revolution inside his gray matter. They wanted to find the neurons that created the Soviet Union.
And then, against the screaming protests of his widow, Nadezhda Krupskaya, they decide not to bury him.
No.
They decide to embalm him, to turn him into a permanent physical idol.
Which is the ultimate irony, isn't it? Because the man we're talking about, Vladimir Lenin, was a militant atheist. He hated religion. He hated superstition. He once called the worship of the dead, and this is a quote, necrophilia. And yet, the party leadership, specifically Stalin, turned him into a secular saint. They built a reliquary, the mausoleum, and placed his body on display like a medieval holy relic.
Krupskaya begged them. We have her letters right here in the source stack. She said, do not raise monuments to him. He attached no importance to all this in his life. But they didn't listen.
They didn't listen.
And that really sets the stage for our mission today. We're trying to peel back that layer of wax and marble. We are stripping away the Soviet mythology to look at the actual human being, Vladimir Lenin.
And that is a massive, complex task.
Yeah.
Because you have to answer the central tension of his life. How does a boy born into a comfortable, noble family in provincial Russia transform into the architect of the Red Terror and the first communist dictator?
That is the question we are answering. We've got a massive stack of sources here, historical biographies from Service and Fidges, party archives from the 1903 split, medical reports on his final strokes, and his personal letters. We are tracking his journey from a gold medal student who loved Latin to the ruthless pragmatist who reshaped the world map.
So let's strip away the statues and get to the source.
Let's start at the beginning.
I think the first shock for most listeners, the thing that really disrupts the whole man of the people narrative, is his background. When you think of the father of the proletariat, you think of, a factory floor, a peasant hut.
Soot and grime.
Exactly, soot and grime.
You certainly don't think of Simbirsk. This was a sleepy provincial town on the Volga River, and you certainly don't think of a father who was a high-ranking education official.
This was the first thing that jumped out at me in the notes. His father, Ilya Ulyanov, wasn't a worker. He was a school inspector. And because of his rank in the civil service, he was actually a hereditary noble.
He was.
That means Vladimir Lenin, the guy who wanted to smash the aristocracy, was technically a noble himself?
Technically, yes. Your Excellency, his father would have been called. But we have to nuance that a bit. It wasn't the nobility of, lavish parties, surf-owning, and oppression. It was what they called the service nobility.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
The Ulyanov household was a model of the Russian intelligentsia. It was incredibly stable, highly cultured. His mother, Maria, was well-educated, the daughter of a doctor. She taught the children languages, German, French, English, and music.
It sounds idyllic.
Yeah.
Sundays at the piano, reading Victor Hugo, it feels very comfortable.
It was. Ilya, the father, was a reformer, a true believer in progress. He was a devout Orthodox Christian who believed his duty to God was to bring education to the peasantry. He opened hundreds of schools. So young Vladimir, or Volodya as the family called him, grew up believing in progress, but progress through the system.
And Volodya fit right in. The sources describe him as this incredibly diligent student. He wasn't running around throwing rocks at police stations. He was sitting in his room translating Latin and Greek.
He was the top student in his high school class, a gold medalist.
So if you looked at him at age 16 in 1886, you would predict a brilliant career as a university professor or a high-ranking bureaucrat like his dad.
Absolutely. You would not predict revolutionary dictator. He was arrogant, sure, the sources are clear, he knew he was the smartest kid in the room, but he was on the proper path.
So what broke the path? Because usually when we look at radicals, we look for poverty, abuse, or some terrible hardship. But here, the catalyst seems to be so specific.
It was trauma, specific state-inflicted trauma. In 1887, everything changed. His older brother, Alexander Sasha, was studying at university in St. Petersburg. Sasha was the star of the family, a brilliant biologist studying earthworms of all things.
Earthworms, right.
But unbeknownst to the family, Sasha had gotten involved with a group plotting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III.
And this wasn't just talk, right? They actually built a bomb.
They did. They hollowed out a medical dictionary and filled it with dynamite and strychnine-laced pellets. It was amateurish, but definitely lethal. But the secret police intercepted them before they could throw it.
And they were caught.
Caught, tried, and sentenced to death. And here is where the tragedy just compounds. His mother, Maria, rushed to St. Petersburg. She sat outside government offices begging for mercy. She appealed to the Tsar.
But Alexander refused to ask for a pardon, didn't he?
He refused. He used the trial to make a political speech, and so on May 8, 1887, he was hanged.
The ripple effect of this on the family must have been devastating. I read that the neighbors in Simbirsk basically just ghosted them.
Completely ostracized. And this is crucial to understanding Lenin's psychology. His father had died unexpectedly of a cerebral hemorrhage shortly before this. Now, his brother is a state criminal. The liberal, polite society they thought they belonged to, the people who came over for tea, turned their backs on them.
Wow.
People crossed the street to avoid his mother.
There is this famous Soviet painting, "We Will Follow a Different Path." It shows young Lenin comforting his grieving mother, looking steely-eyed, supposedly vowing not to use individual terrorism like his brother, but to use Marxism.
Yeah, that is almost certainly a myth created later to make him look prescient. He wasn't a Marxist yet. But the psychological truth of it holds up. This event instilled a cold, personal hatred of the Romanov dynasty in Vladimir. It wasn't just abstract politics anymore. The state had killed his brother. The polite society had abandoned his mother.
He realized the system couldn't be reformed.
It had to be destroyed.
And the state wasn't done with him. He gets into Kazan University, tries to study law, and gets expelled almost immediately.
3 months. That's all he lasted. And it was for a minor student protest, barely a sit-in. But because his name was Ulyanov, because he was the brother of the assassin, the authorities cracked down hard. He was expelled and banished to his grandfather's estate in Kukushkino.
This is the period I find fascinating. He's 17 or 18 years old. He's stuck in the countryside. He's angry. He has nothing to do. So what does he do? He reads.
He reads obsessively. This is his real university. He devours a novel by Chernyshevsky called What Is to Be Done. Now, this is a terrible novel by literary standards, but it was the Bible for young Russian radicals. It features a character named Rakhmatov.
Rakhmatov is the guy who sleeps on a bed of nails to toughen himself, right?
Exactly. He eats raw steak. He has no personal life. He is a machine built for the revolution. And young Vladimir read this book 5 times in one summer. He started modeling himself on Rakhmatov.
So he's actively trying to harden himself.
He stopped listening to music because it made him soft. He started building that hard shell around himself.
And of course, this is when he discovers Karl Marx. He reads Das Kapital.
And this is the key. Most people read Marx as a critique of economics. Lenin read it as a revealed truth, a science. Marx said that revolution wasn't just a good idea, it was inevitable. It was a historical law, like gravity. For a young man whose world had just fallen apart, this certainty was intoxicating.
So unlike his brother, who relied on emotion and bombs, Lenin found a system. He thought, I don't need to throw a bomb, I just need to organize the historical forces.
Precisely. By 1889, he is a convinced Marxist. And when he finally manages to pass his law exams, as an external student, mind you, getting top marks again, he starts practicing law in Samara.
And this wasn't corporate law, I take it.
No, he was defending poor peasants.
Right.
He took cases for peasants fighting against merchants or the state, and he lost almost every single case. But he didn't care about winning the cases in the traditional sense. He was using the courtroom as a laboratory. He saw firsthand how the legal system was rigged against the poor. It just confirmed everything Marx wrote about class bias.
He was gathering data on the enemy.
He was hardening himself further.
So he moves to St. Petersburg, gets involved in the underground, and inevitably he gets arrested again. 1897, he's sent to Siberia. Now, when I hear Siberian exile, I'm thinking Solzhenitsyn. I'm thinking the Gulag, forced labor, starvation.
And that is an anachronism. We are projecting the Stalinist terror, which Lenin helped create, back onto the Tsarist era. Lenin's exile in Shushenskoye was, well, it wasn't a vacation, but it was certainly not a death camp.
The notes say he had a stipend from the government.
He did. The government paid him 8 rubles a month. He rented a room in a peasant hut. He had his books sent to him, crates of them. He went hunting with a shotgun. He was an avid hunter. He went ice skating on the river. He even had a sheepdog.
That's incredible. And he got married there.
He did, to Nadezhda Kripskaya. She was a revolutionary he'd met in St. Petersburg. She was arrested too and requested to serve her exile with him. They married in a church, ironically, because they were both atheists, but the police required it for them to live together.
I read their wedding rings were made out of copper coins.
That's right. It was a partnership with the mind, really. They translated English texts, the Webs, and he wrote his first major book, The Development of Capitalism, in Russia. It was an incredibly productive time. He came out of Siberia in 1900, not broken, but sharper, more focused.
And this is also where the name Lenin comes from, right?
Likely, yes. He used over 150 pseudonyms to confuse the police. Lenin is thought to be linked to the river Lena in Siberia. There's a theory that he chose it to contrast with Georgy Plekhanov, who is sort of the grandfather of Russian Marxism. Plekhanov used the pseudonym Volgin after the Volga River.
And the Lena is longer and flows in the opposite direction.
A little revolutionary one-upmanship. Even in his name, he was signaling, I am the new path.
So his exile ends in 1900. He leaves Russia, goes to Europe, Munich, London, Geneva. And this is where he starts building the machine. He joins the newspaper Iskra the Spark.
The idea of Iskra was to create a collective organizer, a newspaper that would unify all the scattered underground cells back in Russia into one single network.
But Lenin being Lenin, he isn't happy just being part of the team. He wants to drive the bus.
Ooh.
And this leads to the famous split in 1903. This is such a crucial moment. It happened at the Second Party Congress in London, right?
London and Brussels. They had to keep moving because the Belgian police were chasing them. This Congress is one of the most important events of the 20th century, and it all revolved around a dispute that sounds incredibly boring on paper. It was about Article 1 of the party statutes. Basically, who gets to be a member?
Let's break this down, because on one side you have Julius Martov. He's Lenin's old friend. They founded the paper together. Martov wants a broad party.
Martov argued that anyone who supports the party program and gives some money or time should be a member. Basically a big tit. He wanted a party like the Social Democrats in Germany, mass membership, open debates, a democratic party.
And Lenin said no.
Lenin said absolutely not. He wanted a vanguard party. He argued that the working class, left to itself, would only develop trade union consciousness. They'd just want better wages and shorter hours. To get a real revolution, you needed professional revolutionaries.
So not a mass movement.
A small, tight-knit, secretive group that followed orders from the top. He didn't want a debating society. He wanted a military unit. He wanted a weapon.
The voting on this was chaotic, wasn't it? I read there were screaming matches, people storming out.
Oh, it was a total mess. And ironically, Lenin actually lost the vote on Article 1 initially. But later in the conference, the Jewish Bund and some other factions walked out over separate issues. That left Lenin with a slight temporary majority of the remaining delegates.
And here's the branding genius. He immediately jumps on that temporary math.
Instantly. He calls his faction the Bolsheviks, which is Russian for the majority, and he labels Martov's group the Mensheviks, the minority.
Even though, for most of the next decade, the Bolsheviks were actually the smaller faction.
It didn't matter one bit. It was incredible political marketing. Who wants to join the minority party? Who wants to be a Menshevik? It sounds weak. Bolshevik sounds big, hard, powerful.
It also defined the psychology, didn't it? If you were a Bolshevik, you were hard, you were uncompromising. If you were a Menshevik, you were soft.
Exactly. Lenin split the party not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He realized that in a revolution, he didn't want allies who would ask questions and debate things. He wanted subordinates who would execute orders. This split is the moment the seeds of the totalitarian state were planted.
But before he could seize power, he had to go through what he called the dress rehearsal, the 1905 revolution.
Yes, 1905 was triggered by Bloody Sunday in St. Petersburg. The Tsar's troops fired on peaceful protesters led by a priest. Hundreds died, and Russia just exploded. Strikes, mutinies all over the country, and for the first time we see the emergence of the Soviet.
It's just the Russian word for council, right?
That's all it is. But these were spontaneous democratic bodies. Workers in factories elected representatives to run the city, coordinate strikes. It was pure grassroots democracy. Lenin was in exile, but he was fascinated by this. He was looking at the data, literally analyzing the fighting energy of the metal workers versus the textile workers.
He saw the potential.
He saw that the masses were ready to fight, but they lacked leadership. They lacked a vanguard.
The 1905 revolution fails. The Tsar crushes it with the army, and Lenin goes back into the wilderness. This is the long wandering. He's in Switzerland, Paris, London. He's impoverished, he's angry. And this is where we get a glimpse into his personal life that contradicts that robot image. Enter Inessa Armand.
Inessa Armand. This is a fascinating chapter. She was French-born, a revolutionary, brilliant, and beautiful. She was a widow who had been a radical for years. She met Lenin in Paris around 1910. She became his right hand, his translator, and almost certainly his lover.
And this is the only time we see Lenin emotionally vulnerable. But even this relationship wasn't a simple romance. The sources show they fought about politics, specifically about the idea of free love.
It's so telling. Inessa was writing a pamphlet for women workers. She wanted to include the right to free love, meaning a woman's right to choose her partner freely without coercion or economic dependence.
A pretty radical idea for the time. And Lenin shut her down.
Harshly. He wrote her a letter, we have it, where he dissects the concept of free love like a lawyer. He lists 10 possible meanings. He says, if you mean freedom from financial dependence on a husband, fine, that is proletarian. But if you mean freedom from the seriousness of love, freedom to have affairs, no. That is bourgeois decadence.
It's so interesting because politically, he's the most radical man on earth. He wants to burn down the entire government. But socially, personally, he's practically a Victorian conservative.
He was. He believed that revolution required total discipline. Looseness in personal life, drinking, partying, sleeping around, was a distraction. It leaked energy that should be used for the cause. He compartmentalized everything. Even his love life was subject to political analysis.
So he's stuck in Europe, the years are dragging on, the movement seems dead. And then, August 1914, the world explodes. World War I.
The shock of 1914 cannot be overstated. Lenin believed, truly believed, that the international socialist movement would stop the war. The Second International had pledged that if war was declared, workers in France would refuse to shoot workers in Germany. Workers of the world unite, right where?
But that's not what happened at all.
Not even close. When the war started, the German socialists voted for war credits. The French socialists supported the French army. Nationalism completely trumped class solidarity.
Lenin was devastated. I read he thought the newspaper reports were fake, forgeries by the German police.
He felt completely betrayed. He realized the global socialist movement was rotten, and this pushed him into his most radical position yet. He came up with the slogan, revolutionary defeatism.
Which is a tough sell.
Yeah.
I want my own country to lose the war.
It sounds like treason. And to the average Russian seeing their sons die at the front, it was treason. But Lenin's logic was cold and clear. The Tsar is the enemy. The war is just imperialist powers fighting over loot. If Russia loses, the Tsar will fall. So we should turn the imperialist war into a civil war.
And to back this up, he writes Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism.
A crucial text. He argues that capitalism has run out of markets in Europe, so it has to go global, conquering colonies. He argues that global war isn't an accident, it's a feature of the system. It's inevitable as long as capitalism exists.
So he's sitting in Zurich, writing these theories, watching millions die in the trenches. And he's desperate. He's watching Russia start to crumble in 1917. The February Revolution happens, the Tsar abdicates, a provisional government takes over, and he is stuck in Switzerland.
It's a total nightmare for him. The revolution is finally happening, the moment he has waited 30 years for, and he's trapped behind enemy lines. He has to get back to Petrograd. But there is a war on. He can't cross the front lines.
So he makes a deal with the devil.
He makes a deal with the German general staff. The Germans are fighting Russia. They are bogged down on the Eastern Front. They know Lenin wants Russia to lose. They know he wants to pull Russia out of the war. So they figure, if we send this guy back to Petrograd...
It's like injecting a virus into the enemy.
That's exactly how they saw it.
The sealed train. It's one of those legendary stories.
Yes. They put Lenin and a group of about 30 Bolsheviks, including Krupskaya and Inessa Armand, on a train in Zurich. They sealed the doors, literally locked them, so the revolutionaries wouldn't interact with German citizens and infect them with Marxism on the way through.
And there's that famous detail about the chalk line?
Right. On the train, Lenin drew a chalk line on the floor of the carriage. This side is Russian territory, where the toilet was so they could smoke. That side is German territory, where the conductors will. He was running the train like a mini-state. He had to be in control of everything.
They travel through Germany, take a ferry to Sweden, then a sleigh across the ice to Finland, and finally a train to Petrograd. He arrives at Finland Station in April 1917.
And the scene is electric. There are floodlights, bands playing La Marseillaise, a massive crowd of workers and soldiers. The moderate socialists, the Mensheviks, are there with bouquets of flowers to welcome him back into the fold. They give a speech saying, "Welcome back, comrade. Let's work together to defend our new democracy."
And what does Lenin do?
He ignores them. He literally turns his back on the welcoming committee. He climbs up onto the bonnet of an armored car and addresses the crowd directly. And he doesn't talk about unity. He screams, "The worldwide socialist revolution has already dawned. Long live the worldwide socialist revolution."
He basically declares war on the new government 5 minutes after getting off the train.
This leads directly to the April Theses. The very next day, he presents his plan. The Bolshevik Party was confused. They thought, okay, the Tsar is gone, let's support the provisional government, let's consolidate. Lenin said, absolutely not.
So what was his plan?
No support for the provisional government, all power to the Soviets, and the slogans that everyone could understand, peace, land, bread.
He was calling for a second revolution immediately. Even his own wife, Krupskaya, reportedly said, "I'm afraid it looks as if Lenin has gone crazy."
Everyone thought he was unhinged. But Lenin knew the mood of the streets better than the politicians did. He knew the people were tired of the war. He knew the peasants wanted land. The provisional government wasn't giving them either. Lenin promised both. He hammered the party. He debated. He cajoled. He bullied. And eventually, the party fell in line.
But it wasn't a straight line to power. In July, things go sideways. The July days. The Bolsheviks are accused of being German agents, which, to be fair, they were taking German money.
They absolutely were, millions of marks. And when the government released documents proving the German funding, the crowds turned on the Bolsheviks. The party was outlawed. Lenin had to flee again.
This is the haystack moment. I love the visual of this. The man who is about to run the largest country on earth is hiding in a hut made of branches, a shalash in a swamp near Reslev.
He shaves his iconic goatee. He wears a wig that keeps falling off. He poses as a Finnish mower. And the irony is, while he's hiding in a literal haystack, batting away mosquitoes, he's writing his most utopian book, The State and Revolution.
Which is a very strange book, right? Because he argues that this state is going to disappear.
It's his revolutionary fantasy. He writes that once the workers take over, we won't need police, we won't need bureaucracy. Every cook can govern the state will wither away.
But he's writing this dream of total freedom while he is actively plotting a military coup to install a dictatorship.
It shows the compartmentalization in his brain. Theory is one thing, power is another.
And that coup happens in October. Well, November by our calendar, the October Revolution.
And you should notice the difference from 1905 or February 1917. Those were mass uprisings, messy, chaotic, millions of people. October was a surgical strike. It was a conspiracy. It was a coup d'etat. Trotsky organized the military mechanics, seizing the telegraph office, the bridges, the train stations. But Lenin provided the will. He was frantic, writing these notes from his hiding place saying, "History will not forgive us if we do not take power now. Delay is death."
They seize the Winter Palace, the provisional government surrenders, the Bolsheviks are in power, and Lenin is the chairman.
And almost immediately, the utopian promises collide with a very harsh reality.
Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
Because they promise all power to the Soviets. They promise democracy. But in January 1918, they hold an election for a constituent assembly. This is supposed to be the first real parliament to Russia.
And the Bolsheviks lose. They lose big. They got about 24% of the vote. The Socialist Revolutionaries, the Peasant Party, won the majority. The people had spoken, and they didn't choose Lenin.
So Lenin has a choice. Respect the democratic vote and step down, or keep power.
He didn't hesitate for a second. He declared that the election was a relic of bourgeois democracy. When the assembly met on January 5th, the Bolshevik soldiers surrounded the building. They let the delegates talk for one day. Then, late at night, a sailor named Zalesnikov walked up to the chairman and said, "The guard is tired."
The guard is tired. That is chilling.
And that was it. They locked the doors. That was the end of Russian democracy for 70 years.
It was the point of no return.
It proved that power mattered more than the people's will. And this leads us directly into the Civil War, the Reds versus the Whites.
The country falls apart. The whites, a mix of monarchists, liberals, and foreign troops, attack from all sides. To survive, Lenin initiates war communism.
This was total mobilization. Nationalize all industry, ban all private trade, money was effectively abolished, and, most critically, they sent armed detachments into the villages to take grain from the peasants at gunpoint to feed the cities and the army.
It was theft, legalized.
It was survival from his point of view, but it created immense hatred, and that hatred came for Lenin in August 1918.
Fanny Kaplan.
Fanny Kaplan. She was a socialist revolutionary. She felt Lenin had betrayed the revolution by dissolving the assembly. Lenin was leaving a factory speech in Moscow. She was waiting for him.
And she shoots him at close range.
3 shots. One passes through his coat, one hits his shoulder, and one hits his neck, puncturing part of his lung and lodging near his spine. He collapses.
He survives, barely. But this becomes the trigger for the Red Terror.
It gives Lenin the justification he needed. The Bolsheviks passed the decree on Red Terror. They unleashed the Cheka, the secret police, led by the fanatical Felix Dzerzhinsky. Lenin's philosophy was explicitly stated. Revolution is meaningless without firing squads.
We're talking mass arrests, summary executions. And it wasn't about guilt or innocence, was it?
No, it was about class. One of the Cheka leaders, Martin Latsis, famously said, "Do not look in the file of incriminating evidence to see whether or not the accused rose up against the Soviets with arms or words. Ask him instead to which class he belongs. What is his background, his education, his profession? These are the questions that will determine the fate of the accused."
It was class warfare as biology. If you were a bourgeois, you were the enemy and you had to be eliminated.
Exactly. And the most symbolic act of this purge happened in Yekaterinburg in July 1918, the Romanovs.
Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children. They were being held in the Apatia house. The White Army was getting close.
And we know the story. It's horrific. They were woken up in the middle of the night, told they were being moved for their safety, and taken down to the basement.
And executed.
A firing squad opened up in a small room. It was messy, bloody, and brutal. The smoke was so thick they couldn't see what was happening. The children had jewels sewn into their corsets so the bullets ricocheted off them. They had to use bayonets to finish the job.
Why the whole family? Why the children? It seems so needlessly cruel.
Pragmatism. Cruel, cold pragmatism. Lenin wanted to remove the banner. If the whites rescued the Tsar, or even the young Tsarevich, Alexei, they would have a rallying point. By killing them all, he severed the link to the past. He was sending a message to the whites. There is no going back. The old Russia is dead. We killed it.
Did Lenin order it directly?
There is no piece of paper signed by Lenin saying, kill them. He was too careful for that. But historians, including Trotsky later on, confirmed that the decision was made in Moscow by Lenin and Sverdlov. It was a necessary political act in their eyes.
So they win the Civil War. By 1921, the whites are defeated. But the cost? Russia is in ruins, the economy is dead, famine is rampant. There are reports of people resorting to cannibalism in the Volga region.
It was a catastrophe.
And then, the ultimate betrayal happens. The sailors of Kronstadt rise up.
This was a huge psychological blow. The Kronstadt sailors had been the pride and glory of the revolution in 1917. They were the truest believers. And in March 1921, they revolt. Their slogan, Soviets without communists.
They're basically saying, you promised us freedom and you gave us a police state.
Exactly. They demanded free speech, secret ballots, and end to grain requisitioning. They wanted the original promise of 1917 back.
And Lenin didn't negotiate.
He couldn't. He saw it as a counter-revolution. He sent Trotsky and the Red Army, dressed in white camouflage suits, across the frozen ice of the Gulf of Finland to storm the island fortress. Thousands were killed. It was a massacre of their own supporters.
But, and this is the genius of Lenin again, he learned from it. He realized he'd pushed too far.
He called Kronstadt the flash that lit up reality. He realized that the peasants were on the brink of a massive uprising that would sweep the Bolsheviks away. So he pivoted hard. He introduced the NEP, the new economic policy.
Which is basically capitalism.
A limited form of it, yes. He allowed peasants to sell their surplus grain. He allowed small businesses to open, cafes, shops, tailors.
The diehard Bolsheviks must have hated this. They cried. They tore up their party cards. They called it the new exploitation of the proletariat.
They felt completely betrayed. But Lenin was pragmatic. He argued it was state capitalism. He said, look, we keep the commanding heights, the banks, heavy industry, foreign trade, but we let the little guys trade so we don't all starve. It saved the regime. It proved he was willing to compromise on economics to maintain political power.
So he stabilizes the ship. The USSR is formed in 1922, but just as the Soviet state is starting to solidify, Lenin's body starts to fail him.
That bullet from 1918 was still lodged in his neck. The stress was unimaginable. Genetics played a role. His father died young of the same thing. In May 1922, he has his first major stroke.
And this begins the slow death. He loses movement on his right side. He has to learn to write with his left hand.
Yeah.
And the tragedy of it is, as he is losing his physical power, he's watching the power in the party slip into the hands of the one man he really didn't trust. Stalin.
Stalin had been appointed general secretary. At the time, people thought it was a boring administrative job, a clerk. But Stalin used it to appoint his loyalists to every provincial post. He was building a machine within the machine.
And Lenin saw it happening.
He did, especially during the Georgian affair. Stalin was brutally suppressing independence in Georgia, a place Lenin had strong policy feelings about. Lenin accused Stalin of being a great Russian chauvinist and a bully.
And then it got personal.
Very personal. Krupskaya, Lenin's wife, was controlling access to Lenin while he was sick, trying to keep him from getting agitated. Stalin called her up on the phone and just screamed at her. He was incredibly rude, used abusive language, threatened her.
And Lenin found out.
He was furious. He wrote a letter threatening to break off all personal relations with Stalin. But by then, his health was failing fast. A second stroke, then a devastating third stroke in March 1923.
And that third stroke took his voice.
That is the ultimate tragedy. For the last year of his life, the great orator, the man who talked the revolution into existence, was silent. He could only make monosyllabic sounds. He could understand everything. He could see what Stalin was doing, but he couldn't speak. He could only watch.
But before the silence, he left a time bomb, Lenin's testament.
Dictated in late 1922 and early 1923 to his secretaries. It's a series of notes analyzing the leadership. He critiques everyone. He says Trotsky is the most capable man in the committee, but too arrogant and too focused on administration.
But for Stalin, he is savage.
He writes that Stalin has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands, and he's not sure he can use it with sufficient caution. And then after the phone call incident with his wife, he adds a postscript. He writes, Stalin is too rude.
Too rude sounds mild to us, but in diplomatic speak, that's a firing offense.
It was. He explicitly suggests removing Stalin from the post of general secretary. Remove him. It was a direct order from the grave, or nearly from the grave.
So why didn't it happen?
Because Lenin lost the power to enforce it.
Yeah.
He was incapacitated, and the other leaders, Zinoviev, Kamenev, they underestimated Stalin. They were more afraid of Trotsky. They thought they could control Stalin. So when Lenin died, they made a decision to not publish the testament. They read it to a select group, but they buried it.
And in doing so, they sealed their own fates. Stalin eventually had them all executed.
Absolutely, they dug their own graves.
So January 21st, 1924, Lenin dies. And we circle back to where we started.
Yeah.
The funeral, the brain slicing, the embalming.
The appropriation. Stalin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev ignore Krupskaya. They need a symbol, a unifying totem for the new state.
It's fascinating how they constructed this religion. The source material draws these parallels. Lenin becomes the Messiah, Marx is the prophet, and Stalin.
Stalin casts himself as the high priest, the disciple. By deifying Lenin, Stalin makes himself the only valid interpreter of Leninism. If you disagree with Stalin, you aren't just disagreeing with a politician, you are committing heresy against Lenin.
He used the dead man to shield his own rise to power.
He did. He built the mausoleum. He codified Marxism-Leninism as a rigid dogma. He turned the dynamic, pragmatic, often contradictory thoughts of Lenin into a stone tablet that justified his own totalitarianism.
So let's step back. When we look at Vladimir Lenin, the man, what is the legacy?
It's a legacy of immense contradiction. He was a man who wanted to liberate humanity from oppression, yet he built the apparatus of a police state that oppressed millions. He wanted to end war, yet he waged a brutal civil war.
The final irony for me is the state and revolution. He wrote that the state would wither away.
And instead, he built one of the most centralized, bureaucratic, and coercive states in human history. He created the very Leviathan he claimed to despise because he believed it was the only way to force the future into existence. He believed the ends justified the means.
And the cost was millions of lives and a century of geopolitical conflict.
Exactly. He proved that a single determined individual can change history, but he also proved that violence begets violence. The system he built was flawed from the foundation because it denied human freedom in the name of human liberation.
Here's a thought to leave you with, something to chew on. Imagine that third stroke didn't happen in March 1923. Imagine Lenin kept his voice for just 6 more months. Imagine he walked into the party congress and read that testament himself. Remove Stalin.
The 20th century would have looked very, very different. Stalin might have been a footnote, Trotsky might have taken over, maybe the Soviet Union wouldn't have become the totalitarian nightmare it became under Stalin. We'll never know.
It's one of the great what-ifs of history. If you want to understand how the high priest Stalin took that power and used it, make sure you are subscribed to History Titans. We've got more to cover in this series. Smash that like button if you enjoyed this analysis, and share this discussion with someone who thinks they know the full story of the Russian Revolution. We'll see you next time.